Thank you for being here. My name is Michael Elliott. I'm the president of Amherst College, and I want to welcome everybody who's here, especially our guests from off campus. And even we have some prospective students I see in the audience tonight. It's terrific to have you here. And I want to thank you for joining us for this important discussion. You know, from its founding, Amherst College, like so many institutions, has been high-minded in its ideals. And like so many institutions, has fallen short of those ideals. And as part of that, has also been selective in the histories that it tells and the stories that it tells about itself. So in order to be truly forward-looking as an institution and as a community, we need to be honest about our past, to be clear about where we have fallen short in the past of our ideals, to face our entanglements with so many institutions of violence, including the institution of slavery, with honesty and with care, and to do so in a way that avoids easy moralizing and cheap conclusions. It's a complex process and a challenging process, but also a process that's worthy of an academic institution and that calls us to be deep thinkers and to be critical thinkers of ourselves and even the institution that we inhabit. As part of that work, Amherst began an investigation into its own ties to slaveholding and to the capital accumulation based on slavery, as well as the larger racial history of the college extending into the present, and began that work in 2020 as part of a larger anti-racism plan. And it's my role as president not only to carry that plan forward, but then to think about where we will take this research, how we'll translate it into meaningful action, and how we can become a campus that continuously engages with its own history and makes that history visible, the complex histories, to everybody who walks our halls and our hills. I want to thank everybody at Amherst whose work has culminated in tonight's panel discussion as we are very much in progress on this research. The Racial History of Amherst Steering Committee, chaired by Mike Kelly, head of our Archives and Special Collections, Catherine Epstein, Provost and Dean of the Faculty, and Henry Steele Commager, Professor of History, the student researchers who've conducted archival work to learn about the college's ties to slaveholding and the slave economy, Mike Jurek, who's joined us in this fall as our Racial History Research Fellow. I'm also delighted to welcome representatives from two local groups conducting similar research and with whom I'm very glad to be partnering tonight and hopefully into the future as well. Annika Lopez from the Ancestral Bridges Foundation, which is responsible for the wonderful exhibition currently on display in Frost Library celebrating the Black and Afro-Indigenous families who lived and worked in Amherst in the 18th and early 20th centuries. And Erica Slocum from the Documenting the Early History of Black Lives in the Connecticut River Valley, a community-based research project documenting the lives of free, enslaved, and formerly enslaved Black residents of the Connecticut River Valley prior to 1900. There is still so much more to be learned about the college's entanglement with the institution of slavery, the college's involvement in racial discrimination in the many decades after the Civil War. But I'm heartened that we're gathered here tonight to move together toward a clearer picture of our past and the past of our surrounding communities. I hope that what you hear this evening from these researchers will inspire many of you to join us on this journey, not just tonight, but in the weeks and months to come. And with that, I want to bring Mike Kelly, the head of our Special Collections Archives, to the podium to introduce tonight's panel. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, President Elliott. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to our panelists, who I will introduce shortly. I want to begin this evening by centering us on the land. Amherst College and the towns of Amherst and Hadley sit within the homelands of the Nonotuck and Nipmuc nations. As this map from Professor Lisa Brooks's book, The Common Pot, illustrates, the Connecticut River Valley has long been a significant path in a vast network of communities with multi-layered connections of kinship and trade. People from surrounding communities regularly pass through this area, ranging from the Mohegan and Wampanoag to the south, to the Abenaki and Mohawk nations to the northwest, and the Penobscot and Passamaquoddy further into the northeast in the Dawnland. Students at Amherst are fortunate to have the opportunity to take a course from Professor Brooks, who is regarded as one of the leading authorities on the indigenous history of this region. When you have finished reading her 2 books, The Common Pot and Our Beloved Kin, both award winners and highly regarded, there are those of Margaret Bruchac, Abenaki scholar and professor of anthropology at Penn. Many of her writings are available for free via the Penn Scholarly Commons. Hooray for open access publishing. It is not enough to simply acknowledge these nations. It is also our responsibility to educate ourselves. As a librarian, and I am a librarian, my job is to help you all connect with the resources you need to do so. Links and additional resources can be found on the Racial History of Amherst website. Before we move on, it is vitally important that we as a community hold a shared, historically accurate understanding of the history of this place. I want to take this moment to dispel some common misconceptions. Groundbreaking for the first building at the college, South, if you live in South, you're living in the oldest building on campus. The groundbreaking for South was August 9th, 1820. By that time, the dispossession of the original indigenous inhabitants of this area was at least 100 years in the past. That does not mean there were no Nonotuck or Nipmuc people in the area, only that the seizure of native lands by colonizers that began in the 1650s was complete by the mid-1700s. No indigenous settlements were removed to make space for the college. Similarly, Lord Geoffrey Amherst played no role in that dispossession. His military actions against Native people were focused to the far west at places like Fort Pitt, now Pittsburgh, and Fort Detroit in the mid-1760s. As President Eliot noted in his welcome remarks, the Racial History of Amherst College is a project initiated by President Biddy Martin as part of the anti-racism plan launched in the fall of 2020. In response to the Reclaim Amherst Project declaration that, quote, the founders of Amherst College were slave owners, end quote, President Martin charged me with the task of a broad and deep historical study of the college's ties to slaveholding and the capital accumulation that slavery provided. I have served as the co-chair with Provost and Dean of the Faculty, Catherine Epstein, of the Steering Committee on a Racial History of Amherst since that time. In January 2021, I began working with the first cohort of student research assistants. And here they are, all fabulous, fabulous. I missed them all. In May of that year, we launched the Racial History of Amherst College WordPress site as a means of communicating our findings. Among those early findings, we clarified that Reverend David Parsons, the elder, held 3 people in slavery when he was pastor of the First Church of Amherst. And this illustration is vitally important. That's South College on the right. In 1821, Amherst College was 1 building, 3 faculty, and an idea. The building on the far left is the First Church of Amherst, which is approximately where the Octagon stands today. So Reverend David Parsons did in fact hold 3 people in slavery when he was pastor of the First Church of Amherst. Their names are Pompey, Rose, and Goffey, and their presence on the land now occupied by the Octagon has been widely known, at least since the publication of Professor Robert Romer's book, Slavery in the Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts, in 2009. And that is, that runaway ad for Pompeii appeared in Professor Romer's book. Reverend David Parsons, the elder, died in 1781, and his son, New England history, also Reverend David Parsons, was one of the founders of Amherst College. Thanks to the diligent efforts of Anna Smith, class of 2022, and her summa cum laude thesis, we have a richer understanding of the ways in which the college is indebted to Colonel Israel Trask, a founding trustee who enslaved at least 250 people on his plantations in Louisiana and Mississippi. Through Anna's work, we connected with a descendant of those enslaved by Trask, Nika Smith, who came to campus in October 2021 to give a truly remarkable talk on Trask and her work tracing the genealogy of formerly enslaved populations. A video of her talk is available on the college's YouTube channel, linked from the Racial History website. By the end of 2021, we realized that there was more research than a single librarian and a group of students could manage. So we launched the search for a postdoc research fellow to make a deeper dive into this history. In a moment, we will hear some of the findings Mike Jurek has turned up since his arrival in September 22. We also joined Universities Studying Slavery, a consortium of over 100 colleges and universities sharing best practices as they engage in truth-telling, educational projects focused on the legacies of racism in their histories. While we have been working steadily for nearly 3 years, there is still an enormous amount of work to be done. The archives hold detailed records of the college's finances and land holdings that require very close reading, and very close reading of cursive, I will mention. The connections between the college and the economies of slavery are not always as obvious as those of Israel Trask. What does it mean if an early donor to the college made his money in, quote, the New England rum trade? What are we to make of another donor placing an advertisement for a runaway Negro boy in a local newspaper in 1822? While 1783 is often cited as the end of slavery in Massachusetts, we know Trask brought enslaved people with him when he escaped the heat of the South to spend summers in his mansion in Springfield between 1821 and 1835. And finally, as Mike Jurek will report, what does it mean that the construction of campus buildings, including the Octagon, Appleton, and Williston, were largely funded by men who owned and operated textile mills that turned Southern cotton into finished goods? With that, I will introduce our panelists for the evening in the order in which they will present. The four of us represent just a handful of projects currently underway around issues of slavery and race in our region. There are others at work elsewhere, including the Reparations for Amherst research team and Historic Northampton's efforts to document Native and Black lives in that town. All right, beginning with Mike J. There didn't used to be so many Mikes at Amherst. Anyway, Mike Jurek studies and teaches Black history and Africana intellectual traditions in North America and the Atlantic world. His research focuses on slavery in universities, slavery and abolition, and the history of Black studies. And Mike has previously published on the Amherst College Anti-Slavery Society of the 1830s. It's a fascinating work. Anika Lopes is a member of the first Black and Afro-Indigenous families of Amherst and an internationally renowned milliner. She is the founder of the Ancestral Bridges Foundation and a member of the Amherst Town Council. And as President Elliott reminded us, there is a fantastic exhibition in Frost. Thank you for that. And I also had a great visit over to the Civil War tablets today. Go see those if you have not. Erica Slocum, representing about 10 different projects, right, Erica? Erica Slocum is a PhD student of Black Studies at UMass Amherst. She has been a student of Professor John Bracey since 2010. Her current research focuses on the use of oral histories as a means to empower Black communities, retell the history of communities where Black voices have been obscured, and claiming space in public museums and archives. She's currently working on multiple projects across Massachusetts, including the Black Holyoke Project at Wistariahurst, the Lesbians of Color Oral History Project at Historic Northampton, Recovering New England Voices at Historic New England, and the early history of Black lives in the Connecticut River Valley Project. She is an artist, mother, and a historian of Black history. Please join me in welcoming our panel, and I will turn it over now to Mike J.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you, Mike, for the introductions. I just want to take a moment to thank Mike Kelly for his work on this project. The work I'm doing would not be possible without what he and student researchers have done over the past few years, and so thank you, Mike, for that and for your ongoing support. And thank you, Anika and Erica, for being here and for your important work as well. In a 1996 essay on multiculturalism, Cedric Robinson vividly and succinctly captured the essence of the defense of Western civilization. Observing how intellectual traditions in Europe, specifically Germany, produced justifications for racism, colonialism, and the Holocaust, Robinson provides an analysis of the nature of the intellectual scaffolding of Western civilization that can aptly be applied to the university in the United States. A function of universities has been, quote, the subordination and perversion of knowledge by its suturing to the interests of power and privilege, end quote. The history of the University in the United States aligns well with Robinson's arguments regarding the production of ideas and learning for the benefit of the few at the expense of the many. And indeed, this aligns with the history of Amherst College, as the research into this historical relationship with slavery and racism affirms. As I began this research, I was tasked to specifically investigate the financial connections the college had with enslavement. Additionally, elements of my own work have focused on the intellectual context of Amherst College around questions of racism in its early history. With that in mind, my remarks are going to focus on two elements of the college's racial history: the financial connection the college had with slavery and the slave economy, and racist thought that was popular on campus in the mid-1820s and early 1830s. The findings result in the following argument. Amherst College unequivocally financially profited from slavery and the slave economy. Indeed, slavery made the college a viable project at two crucial moments in the college's history, once at its founding and another time in 1847. White male faculty and students also developed racist thought that was prevalent in academia and in U.S. society more generally in the antebellum era. The financial and intellectual elements are reinforcing. Enslavement in the economy had built, sustained the college, and in turn, it supported college leaders and students, as I just mentioned, who made racist arguments about black people. Not only were the financial connections to slavery and the development of racist thought a central element of the college's founding and evolution, the historians of the college have neglected to substantively include these subjects or address them in their works. It has never been part of the college's narrative until this project began, which was a result of student protest. Building on the work of Mike and student researchers, I began researching the donors of the charity fund, which was established at the founding of the college to finance it in its early years. The sources of money coming from early donors reveal a few themes. Chattel slavery was part of the college's founding, as was another form of unfree labor, indentured servitude. Israel Trask, who has been mentioned already, we know much about him thanks to Anna Smith's thesis, as Mike mentioned. He was a founder of the college, a board member from 1821 to 1835, and was pivotal in securing the charter. He owned at least 250 enslaved people in Mississippi and Louisiana, and he donated a total of $1,010 to the college. Jared Hawks Jr., who was mentioned before as well, of Goshen, donated $200 to the charity fund, and in the 1820 census records, an enslaved woman is listed as a member of Hawks's household. This finding merits further research, and as Mike mentioned, such a finding complicates the history of emancipation in Massachusetts. Hawks was not a founder of the college, but he is someone who contributed to the founding. And his donation was made possible from indentured servitude, and that was the runaway ad that Mike had on the screen before. He placed that ad in newspapers for an individual named Charles Way, an 18-year-old, quote, Negro boy who ran away. Alexander Field, Howard Lothrop, Nathaniel Johnson, all donors of the charity fund, placed ads for indentured laborers who ran away. Now, indentured servitude was a system of labor exploitation as evidenced by these runaway ads, but it was not the same as chattel slavery. But what we conclude by these sources is that white men who benefited from racial and labor exploitation helped found the college. Another theme that predominates throughout the early years of the college's history is that many of the donors were merchants who profited from buying and selling slave-produced goods, which is by far the most prevalent connection the college had with slavery, as we know to this point. Merchants from South Hadley, Sunderland, and Springfield paid for advertisements selling, quote, goods from the West Indies, sugar, molasses, rum, and a variety of other goods from the Caribbean. For example, Josiah Bardwell, a merchant from South Hadley, posted advertisements for, quote, St. Croix rum, molasses, and sugar. He gave $200 to the college. Bardwell also owned a cotton mill, or also owned a mill that manufactured cotton in South Hadley. Ariel Cooley, a merchant from South Hadley as well, dealt directly in trade from Barbados. He traded in slave-produced goods and donated $500 to the college. Seth Porter Jr. of Cummington, Massachusetts, owned a cotton mill and donated $600 to the college. Nathaniel Smith, who was a founder of the college and a trustee, made his fortune, as Mike mentioned, quote, in the New England rum trade, a clear indication of wealth making based on slave-produced goods at the time. He donated $1,000 to the college, and after he died, he bequeathed $4,000 worth of bank stock. Another founder of the college, Samuel Fowler Dickinson, also profited from slave-produced goods. In 1814, Dickinson invested in, quote, the Amherst cotton factory. And here on the slide, we can see Samuel Fowler Dickinson's name a few lines down from the top. And this was a legislative record that chartered the Amherst cotton factory in 1814. During his time with the college, Dickinson donated at least $1,905 to the college. The Cotton Connection present at the college's founding with Dickinson as well as with Seth Porter Jr., this Cotton Connection would remain vital in subsequent decades, as I'll show in a moment. Enslavement, forms of unfree labor, and the slave economy were central factors in the establishment of Amherst College. And those financial resources provided the context in which white faculty and students developed racist ideas about citizenship and equality in the United States. During the 1820s and early 1830s, the American Colonization Society, or the ACS, was very popular at Amherst College. At its core, the ACS was founded on this idea that black people cannot be equal to whites and therefore should leave the country. College officers supported the American Colonization Society, and I can talk in more detail about that organization during the Q&A, but Heman Humphrey, the second president of the college, Samuel F. Worcester, a professor, Solomon Peck, also a professor and librarian, were all active proponents of the movement at the local, state, and national levels. Their involvement in the organization trickled down to the campus and influenced students. There's a series of essays that students wrote in 1827 alone where they put forth very vividly sort of racist language, and I'm not going to go through all those examples, but I will give one just to illustrate the kind of ideas that students were putting forth at the time. In an 1827 senior composition, Ebenezer Bradford believed the federal government should patronize the ACS, whose design was, quote, one of the noblest that ever engaged the thoughts of man, end quote. According to Bradford, the principal aim of the ACS was to remove free black people from the polity because, quote, the color of their skin was an eternal wall of separation between them and the whites, end quote. As long as black people in the United States, Bradford continued, as long as black people were in the United States, he continued, they, quote, must always be treated as an inferior race of beings, end quote. And again, there's other examples of this kind of language that I'm not going to continue to quote. Together, the perspective these students put forth revealed deeply racist ideas about black people that were forged on campus. And I'll add that over the span of 4 years, Amherst students donated well over $100 to the ACS. And here's an excerpt from a publication in 1833 documenting the organization of an auxiliary society on campus, a colonization society, called the Amherst College and Amherst Colonization Society. And here we see S.M. Worcester. Samuel Worcester is a professor at Amherst. E. Dickinson is Edward Dickinson. H.W. Beecher, Henry Ward Beecher, at this time as a student, was part of the colonization movement as well. With that financial and intellectual context of the early college in mind, the college slowly grew. More faculty were hired, more students were admitted. But by the late 1830s and early 1840s, the college was in financial precarity due to the economic depression of 1837. College officials looked to the state of Massachusetts for aid, and they also established a $100,000 subscription to help save the college. Joseph Vail, a trustee and founder of the college, agreed to become a full-time agent collecting donations and subscriptions. By 1844, the college was in dire straits financially. Heman Humphrey resigned, the second president of the college, he resigned. Edward Hitchcock Sr. assumed the office. And Hitchcock and his background in the natural sciences would prove decisive in securing funds for the college. The story goes that Hitchcock met Josiah B. Woods on the way back from the inauguration of President Edward Everett at Harvard, and Hitchcock lamented to Woods about the financial status of the college. And Woods in turn assured Hitchcock that he could secure funds to build a new scientific observatory on campus. Woods was from Enfield, Massachusetts, and he developed a carding business, which was part of the technology for processing cotton, which connected him to Abbott Lawrence, who was a major cotton merchant in Lawrence and Lowell, Massachusetts. In fact, the town of Lawrence is named after him. Woods convinced Lawrence that Hitchcock was a top scholar and he deserved funding for this new science building that he wanted to build. So Woods tapped into Lawrence's money, which was derived from the cotton economy. And additionally, that connection to Lowell directed Vail, Joseph Vail there, who was also a trustee and founder of the college. I mentioned that he's a full-time agent for the college, but he directed this connection to Lowell, directed Vail there, and he secured funds from Samuel Appleton, who bequeathed parts of his fortune, also made from cotton, to the college. He donated $10,150 worth of stocks and cotton mills to Amherst College. Vail also tapped into his connections in Brimfield, Massachusetts, where namely Samuel Austin Hitchcock, who made his fortune investing in cotton and was one of the single largest donors to the college, he tapped into that resource as well. Austin Hitchcock endowed professorships, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then there's Samuel Williston of East Hampton, who made his fortune on button manufacturing, but he was also heavily involved in cotton as well. Williston, of course, was a significant donor. He endowed professorships, and of course, Williston Hall is named after him. In total, he donated $223,700. The financial resources from cotton and the slave economy saved the college at a crucial time in 1847. In Tyler's history, he records this moment and attributes the college being saved to the following, quote, "How can we avoid the conviction that prayer was the grand agency that smoothed troubled waters and gave the college victory," end quote. Prayer was not the grand agency that saved the college. It was cotton and the money from it. Money from slavery is what saved Amherst College in 1847. And here on this slide is some of the donations from some of these figures I was just mentioning. The Williston Professorship is from Samuel Williston. The Graves Professorship is from Samuel Austin Hitchcock and Williston together. There was, importantly, a donation from the state that came in at $25,000 that was paid out over 5 years. The Sears Foundation is from David Sears of Boston. He owned a bunch of land in Boston and made money off of that, as far as I know, but there's more research that could be done on him. And the Woods Cabinet is the octagon that Josiah Woods helped to secure funding for, and he donated to as well. And this other chart here I mainly put up is for 1855, the Appleton Cabinet that came from Samuel Appleton, and of course 1857, Williston Hall. But as you can see by these years, after 1847, there's a great expansion in college buildings, and again, cotton played a significant factor in that. The history of Amherst College and the history of slavery are intertwined. Slavery was crucial to its founding in the 1820s. The process of indigenous dispossession cleared space for slavery's expansion in the antebellum South, and cotton became king. And indeed, cotton became king at Amherst College. The slave economy set the college's finances on a solid footing, providing for the establishment of new buildings, professorships, and facilitated the further development of racist thought and social relations on campus. The legacies of slavery and racism continued to shape the college's history in the late 19th and into the 20th century, and many questions and research leads remain on a variety of these subjects, which we can talk about during the Q&A. And some of those questions include where are the college's financial resources coming from today, for example? How have the logics of capital, racism, and the hierarchies of power, so crucial to the founding of the college, shaped the nature of the institution over time? How do they shape how the college functions and its operation today? This history should inform us, and it should inform questions in our present as to the financial and intellectual context, as well as the social relations of Amherst College today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here, for inviting me. To everyone who has taken this time from their evening, President Elliott, the two mics. Erica, and especially I want to give a special thanks to our youth, our student population for being here. You are really the ones who will continue this work and, more importantly, evolve it. So I thank you for being here and spending this time with us. I have to ground myself because I'm still overwhelmed and get emotional about sharing this history with you here. My indigenous ancestors have been here in the valley for millennium, and my black ancestors for at least 7 documented generations. Our blood is mixed and our roots span beyond current area, town, and city lines. My ancestors lived on Baker Street, Snell Street, Hazel Avenue, Amity Street below Blue Hills Road, Railroad Street, Main Street, McClellan, and Beston Streets. They lived and worked in Amherst for centuries. They were integral to the fabric and culture of Amherst and surrounding towns. They served in the Revolutionary War and the all-black Massachusetts 54th Infantry Regiment and 5th Cavalry Regiment during the Civil War. My 4 times great-grandfather, Christopher Thompson, was a member of the 5th Cavalry who went to Texas to carry out the military acts that represent the day we now celebrate as Juneteenth. He returned to Amherst and died a pauper at age 79. He and his brothers are buried in the African-American section of the West Cemetery. They connect Amherst to its place in the history of Juneteenth. This section of the cemetery is literally made up of my whole family, where I grew up going to funerals. My grandfather, Dudley Bridges, whose work serves as an inspiration for the work I'm honored to carry forward, was the last person to be buried in the West Cemetery in 2004. They built and founded the first black churches in Amherst and facilitated the smooth functioning of commerce and institutional education. My ancestor, Henry Jackson, is rarely acknowledged as an entrepreneur or for his contributions to local businesses of the time. He helped businesses make deposits before there were banks or railroads in town. He transported palm leaves used to make straw hats in Amherst before there was a thriving hat factory in town. Henry lived on Railroad Street, and we have reason to believe that street was previously named Henry Street. And let's find out together, please, and if this is true, let's add his name back to that sign. I'm a descendant of those who survived genocide and lived through slavery on this land named Amherst, throughout the valley and surrounding states against all odds. We were not meant to know our history, never mind be the ones to tell it or be an authority on it. I grew up saturated in this history every day so that I would know where I come from, so I would never forget, and so I could share it. My ancestors are the reason I have a seat at this table today and the reason I founded Ancestral Bridges. I founded this organization with a 15th generation descendant of English colonists, Cinda Jones. Her ancestors flew a Massachusetts Bay Colony flag featuring a naked savage and a banner reading, "Come over and help us." Her ancestors settled Hatfield in the 1630s and Amherst in the early 1700s. Her great-uncle bought a 5-year-old black girl named Wealthy Wheeler at a Northampton slave auction in 1790. He freed Wealthy, and she worked as a cook and lived with the family during her life when she was unmarried. We are working to bring Wealthy's story forward. Together and with an amazing board, we are dedicated to learning more about our past, helping Black and Indigenous people build generational wealth, and helping BIPOC with first-time home ownership opportunities. Amherst College has become a valued partner, and I'm very grateful for that. We have started to daylight our shared past and tell the stories of my ancestors. Mike Kelly invited my mother and I to explore the college's archives so that we might understand more about my family's history that has been appropriated at best and erased at worst. For those of you who have not met my mother, Deborah Bridges, who Mike Kelly has talked about, she is the creator of the Civil War tablet exhibit that's at the Bang Center in downtown Amherst. It highlights the Black soldiers of the 54th Regiment and 5th Cavalry that connect the town and the college to the history of Juneteenth. This was an initiative started by her father, Dudley Bridges, in the late 1990s. I would like to give a special thank you to Sarah Barr, who was the first from the college to approach me to see me and this neglected history and invite the Ancestral Bridges exhibit to the campus. Along with Blake Darty and Jessica Clem, Sarah embraced the style and flavor, if you will, that comes with descendant voices and firsthand accounts, and how this breathes life and authenticity into documents and research alone. I still do not have the words to describe what it feels like to see my family uplifted on the walls of a place that they have been entwined with from the beginning and worked under degrading conditions. I encourage you all to visit the Ancestral Bridges exhibit on view at the Frost Library through July. It may leave you with more questions than answers, and perhaps that is the point. There is a guide attached that encourages engagement, links to more information, and to Ancestral Bridges and the work we do. I hope one thing is clear and without question is that this history is important. It's important as Emily Dickinson and deserving of a permanent space to be appreciated, explored, and evolved by future generations. And I want to end with a happy birthday to my great-grandfather, Gil Roberts. Gil was born in 1896 in a house his father, Perry Roberts, built on Hazel Avenue. His father, Perry Roberts, and his father before were enslaved on the same plantation as Frederick Douglass. We always celebrated Grampy, as I called him, his birthday on April 5th, before we learned through the help with historians, that his birthday was actually April 25th. And we did figure this out while he was alive, so he was able to have 2 birthdays that year. But, Gil, as I referred to, he represents the history of jazz in Amherst. He was an internationally renowned musician who played with Louis Armstrong, Josephine Baker, in Egypt for King Farouk, who gifted him 2 canes. One of them is on display at the Ancestral Bridges exhibit. His youngest daughter, my Aunt Edie, did not meet him until she was 6 years old because he, looking for employment to take care of his family, was away for 7 years. And when he became sick, he came home, and he came to work at Amherst College like his father before him as a custodian. And still, he mentored Amherst College students. There's a wonderful article called All They Can Say Is No that's attached also to our library guide for the exhibit that was written from a former student, Ulrich Hayes, who went on to be an ambassador and was originally from Brooklyn. And he wrote about how he would sit in the stairways and talk to my great-grandfather about how he wanted to go into fencing, he wanted to go in archery, but everyone said, "You're a tall black guy, you need to be a ball player." And so my grandfather would encourage him to do him and say, he would always say, "All they can say is no," and that being the title. And, I myself always heard those words from Gil Roberts, who was like a father to me, and they were always followed by their yes or their no will not define you. And he lived to be 106. So, hopefully everyone will join me in wishing him a happy birthday. And with that, I would like, to thank Mike Kelly and Mike Jarek for inviting me, and to the college for holding this space.
So I'm going to try not to read off the paper because I'm not the best orator in that sense. But so I'll just reiterate thank you to everyone who is here today. Thank you to Amherst College for inviting me to the mics. I appreciate you for giving me this space and this opportunity to talk about my work. I'm not going to go into specificity about the things because I would keep you all here all night. So I'm not going to do that today. But I am going to give a brief generalization of kind of the projects that I've been working on here in Western Mass and more broadly across New England. So this is just what I'm going to talk about. So I am as Mike said, I'm a mother, I'm an artist, I'm a world traveler, and an activist. These are my boys. This is an old picture of them, but I love them dearly, my Black boys. And so a lot of the work that I do, or all of the work that I do, is not only for me and kind of reclaiming, my history, and the histories of those that have been integral to my life and my work as all of the things that I am, but also for the generations that are coming behind us, so that they know, one, in this field of museum studies, in academia even, we are not pervasive. Our history is not pervasive. And so I feel like just by being here, being at Amherst College, doing the work that I do in the community on reclaiming our histories, it really sets the future generations up for their success and for them knowing who they are, and having the opportunity to really reclaim place and space. So the first project that I'll talk about is the Reliquary of Blackness, and this is the project in Holyoke at Wisteria-Hearst. And so the beautiful thing about this project is that I worked collectively with folks from the community, particularly elders in the community, to retell their stories and to do it in a beautiful way where we were able to exhibit their histories. But one of the biggest things that has come out of this project is a Black archive, right? One that didn't exist. It spans across repositories of history, that being museums and archives in Western Mass. And so just a shameless plug. We currently got a funding from Mass Humanities to continue the story. And so on Juneteenth this year, so Monday, June 19th, we'll have a Black in the Garden celebration for Juneteenth at Wisteria-Hearst. And so I hope to see you all there, maybe. Which will culminate in an exhibit that will open also in June of this year. As my work as a research scholar at Historic New England, this project is funded through the Americana Foundation, who I'm grateful to, because otherwise I wouldn't have work, I wouldn't have a job, right? And through this project, I'm working to tell the stories of Black folks as it relates to the homes that Historic New England, previously known as Spinnea, has in their collection. They are stewards of these homes, right? And so it's really looking at the Black folks who were connected to the homes, so those folks who worked in the homes, those folks who were enslaved by the owners, either in New England or in other places in the American South and in the Caribbean, to tell their stories as it relates to the homes, as I said, and also as it relates to the community, the broader community that these houses are in. And so part of that project, as Mike said, I'm an oral historian by trade. And so I really like to sit down with people from the community for them to have the opportunity to tell their stories. What did these homes that have been predominantly the story that has been told has been of the white people who have owned the space, but what did that look like for the families, right? Knowing that this image here is Watson Tyler, and Watson Tyler worked at the Codman Estate in Lincoln, Mass, and his family, up until recently, owned a home that he purchased in 1900, or he built the house in 1900. Sorry, he purchased the land in 1898. And they lived on that property, in that house, until the pandemic struck. And so I'm working with families like this, again, working in archives. When I think particular, there's another project, and I'm not going to be long-winded, but I'm going to tell you about it because it's fascinating. In Salem, there is a neighborhood that was called Roast Meat Hill, right? And it was a Black neighborhood. And in it was the 18th and 19th century. In the 19th and 20th century, it became known as the Endicott neighborhood, which was an Italian-American community. and the history of Roast Meat Hill and the Black folks who lived and worked in that area with the covering of the Mill Pond were erased, right? Like their history was erased. They aren't spoken about. And so now with my work at with my work in Recovering New England Voices, we're having the opportunity to tell that story in Salem at the Gedney House in the Cox Cottage, and bringing out the deep history of Black folks in Salem. So I'm pointing at you, sorry, Mike. And so the other project that I love, so I'll preface, right, is that I love Black people, right? I love everything about us, right? Everything about our history and who we are and how we've overcome and how we continue to persevere, right? In spaces, in the world that continuously tells us that they don't want us. And in that, we continue to thrive, right? And so with the Lesbians of Color oral history, I'm assuming that everybody here knows Northampton, right? And knows that Northampton is a very white space. And as these women are coming to Northampton, for school or for work, within the 5 colleges, they find each other, right? Because that's what we do, right? It is that we build community. And so through the Lesbians of Color in Northampton Oral History Project, again, also funded by Mass Humanities, I've had the opportunity to not only look at the history of lesbians in Northampton, but also to pull out what it has been like and what it was like for women of color who were finding each other, finding themselves, and being able to reimagine what their life and the potential of their life could be through this space. In particular, I don't know if you guys can see, because I overlaid things, because why? But this is a banner that says De Colores, Lesbians of Color, Western Mass. And this is a banner that these women marched down the main street, in the Pride Parade, right? And so this banner was made by Danenga Deist Akpem, who is an artist and a scholar currently working out of Chicago, who, when I asked her, why this picture, like why this image? And she said, it's just a variation of my face. Right, because I felt like as we're walking down, they also had T-shirts made. As we're walking down the streets of Northampton, I want people to know that we're here, right? And I want them to be able to see us in our hair and in our bone structure, and know that like we are here and we belong here, right? And so I really love this project, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. So thank you to Betty Sharp and to K. Marion Raymond, who's not here today, I don't think, no. But it's really given me the opportunity to have folks tell their stories, and through all of these projects, to really look at the sacredness of our stories and our history. And so I'll tell you about it in a second, but it's a thing. So the other project that I'm working with is I currently sit on the committee for documenting the history of Black lives in the Connecticut River Valley. And through this project, they've been able to connect different repositories and, archive, that being archives and museums, and individuals even, the history of Black folks in the Connecticut River Valley. And what that has kind of culminated in is this website. This is the front page of that. Where they have created a database and also blog posts from different scholars and individuals in the community talking about the importance of this history. And so if you all have an opportunity, I would greatly appreciate if you would look at the website, and I can get it to you because it's not on there, or you can just Google documenting the early lives of Black lives, the early history of Black lives in the Connecticut River Valley. Sorry, I'm like nervous. And try not to ramble too much. But through this project, I worked with folks at the Porter Phelps Huntington Museum in Hadley, looking at Black folks who worked at at the house over multiple generations, and also at the end of the period of enslavement, or the quote unquote end of the period of enslavement in Massachusetts, continued to live and work in Hadley. And one of the things that we found was that there's this period where we're like, oh, enslaved people, enslaved people, enslaved people, they were here. And then we just stopped talking about Black folks in Hadley. And so what I found in doing the research is that Black folks lived and worked in Hadley and owned land and, contributed a lot to the homes and the livelihoods of white folks who were wealthy in this community, particularly the Porter Phelps family. And I'll show you because it's coming. So we had the opportunity to speak at the New England Museum Association, their conference this year in December in Springfield. And the title of our panel was What Didn't Happen Here? And so it's really looking at different museums and museum houses and how we don't like to talk about slavery in Massachusetts, right? Because it wasn't here, right? And I'm being facetious for those of you who couldn't tell. And so we don't have a real deep knowledge on a general level or on a broader level about the history of enslavement, that period of enslavement here. But one of the things is that some of the homes that the folks on my panel have in their kind of like stewardship, their period of enslavement didn't happen in Massachusetts, but a lot of the money that enabled them to amass the wealth that they had happened in the American South as well as in the Caribbean. And so as we were talking about this, we had a room that was packed. I think we had like 80 or 90 people in the room, and it was hot. It was too much. It was a lot. But a lot of people had questions of, well, like, how do we do this, right? Like, how do we, in our institution, in our small institution or our large institution, where, the board doesn't want to talk about the period of enslavement, they don't want to talk about free Black folks, they don't want to talk about the Black community that surrounds our institution. So how do we do that? How are you all doing that? And so out of that came this group, which is a communities of practice on interpreting histories of enslavement and freedom across New England. And so if any of you all are NEMA members, and even if you're not, I encourage you to, if there's any information that you feel like you can glean from a community like this, or that you can add to it, I would encourage you to come. I think our next meeting, we meet once a month, the last Tuesday of every month. So I think that's April 28th, but dates, I don't know. And sorry, because I should have came more prepared for that. But we do meet, and we have like a general kind of like conversation about what's going on, and then we have these presentations every other month where folks who have had success in doing this work come and speak, and they present to the community at large. And so that is through NEMA, the New England Museum Association. And it's on their website, so you could definitely register even if you aren't a member of NEMA. And so in part of my work, so I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. My dissertation, when it's done, is gonna be titled Reliquary of Blackness. And I don't know if folks know what a reliquary is, but a reliquary is a space, a container for holy relics. And so in my work, I decided I will shout out Sally Gallman, who is not here today, who presented to me like a reliquary in one of her classes. And in my work at Holyoke, I was like, I see Black history as holy. I see our stories as sacred. And so why shouldn't the museums see it as such, right? And how do we get ourselves to that point? And so that is part of my work that I'm doing across all of these wonderful projects and places. And so I'm putting these, I have a couple other ones, and then I promise I'm done. These are family trees. And A lot of them are just the beginning of the families so the Fuller family is, Bushman Fuller was enslaved in Holyoke, or West Springfield at the time before it became Holyoke, by the Eli family. And Bushman in 1778, it's there on the family tree. He was willed his freedom by Eli. Don't remember his first name. Apologies.
Was it Justin Eli?
Wasn't Justin.
He's a donor to the college.
Look at, and connections, we're making them. No, thank you. He was willed his freedom, and in that, he worked in Springfield. He went back to the Eli family and said, look, I want land. I'll pay you these 100 bushels, which equaled $100, so that I can have this land. And in that, he knew Flora Perry, who was enslaved in Connecticut, and through him working the land for a couple of years, went to Connecticut to a minister and said, hey, so you think I can purchase her freedom from you? And he did that. And Flora was a very pious woman, very religious woman, and she helped build some of the churches and found some of the churches in Holyoke. And so their history is a long one, not going to get into it today, but it's really important, and this doesn't exist. And so thankful to the work of Ella DiCarlo, who has passed, but was she was a reporter in Holyoke for the Transcript Telegram, and really pulled out some of the history, and I was able to kind of follow the threads that she left in order for me to find a lot of the members of their family and that history. So again, June, Wisteriahurst, meet you there. And so the Till family is a Hadley family. The Bias family is a Hadley and Amherst family. And again, all of these family trees are just the beginning. It's what I found, for the Hadley families, what I found in 6 months while I was working with Porter Phelps Huntington. But I know that, as Anika has said already, that there are these stories that exist. There are these families that exist. And so for me, the important part is that we begin to pull those names out. We begin to, if we can't put a face to a name, that we at least give these folks names, that we are able to find where they live and say, even if that place doesn't exist anymore, part of the reclaiming space in place is saying that this community also was a Black community, and we were here, and we helped build this land, and we helped build these spaces in the way that we know them today. A lot of them wouldn't exist without Black people. And the Jennings family, who I love. Sorry. They're a Holyoke family, but they're also an Amherst family, and it's really cool because I'm doing the Hadley project, and as I'm going through, I'm like, I know that name. I know that name. I know these people. And I go back to Wisteriahurst, and there was an interview that was done with a Jennings family member, or with multiple Jennings family members. And in doing that, there's an oral history that exists already in Holyoke. And when I started to listen to it again, re-listen to it, I found that they talk about Hadley, they talk about Amherst, they talk about the legacy of their family in this space. And so we made that connection. But like I said, wanted to put those there for you all. But yeah, thank you.
Each one of us could have talked for an hour and a half about what we've been working on and what we found, but we thought we'd just keep it short to introduce these things. And we have until 8:30 this evening, so we would love some questions from the audience. We would love to have a conversation as a community. And there's a microphone up front if folks want to step down and ask a question. This is being recorded, it is not being live streamed, but the recording will be up online after this event. So.
I would just like to acknowledge the by National Public Radio of Harvard University's connection with slavery, which was really shocking. I mean, I was stunned by it, but I would like to I think that's been within the past 6 months or so. And so it's great to see these institutions of higher learning looking the bull in the eye, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's a lot more looking to do, so thank you for that. And we've got our question here.
Yeah, hello. Thank you so much, Erica and Anika. That was really, really insightful and interesting to know more about that history. But this question is more so directed toward Amherst. I know that currently the town of Amherst has their reparations assembly, the African American Heritage Reparations Assembly, and I'm wondering what Amherst is tangibly contributing, whether that be, or tangibly meaning financially contributing toward that, given our history with the displacement and slavery of the town of Amherst.
I think what I can say about that from the position of someone working on the research wing is that we've been in touch with the Reparations for Amherst folks from the beginning, from 2020. I forget when Mattia Kramer and I connected. It was shortly, sometime 21, maybe early 21. We have been contributing research. And I want to say, you know, that's my lane, right? I'm a librarian, I'm doing the research. And I've always taken the position that what we need to do as the Steering Committee on Racial History is surface the details. Details matter. I mean, one of the things that I think is vital for everyone to understand, if you've taken a class from Austin Serrett, if you're making a claim, you had better have some evidence to back up that claim. And so what we want to do is say, like, if there is a claim that there has been harm that requires Amherst to do repair, let's be really clear on the details of that harm so we get it right. But beyond that, in terms of what the college's financial commitment is, that is outside my lane. I don't know if anyone from the college wants to speak to that at this moment, but I really do feel that getting the research right is vitally important. I don't know if, there's no one else at the panel who can speak to that.
We have not yet made a financial commitment, but it's certainly something that we're going to work with the town to think about as that effort goes forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone, especially Anika and Erica. Really nice to meet you, Erica. I mean, I guess we didn't really meet, but really nice to hear your talk. But I just wanted to know, like, how is this research informed, like, concrete plans to support reparations?
I'm sorry, did you say how? Is this
Yeah,
research?
I meant, like, specifically, like, how Amherst College's research, how has it informed concrete plans of, like, reparations? You know, reparations can occur. Reparations takes many forms, and reparations doesn't have to be solely, like, informed by a finished result of history. And so how has reparations and this research worked in tandem?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, I can say, especially to your point of there are sometimes smaller gains, there is a sense of atonement to have a history that was hidden, made less than, people who were treated as less than, now being here on these walls, celebrated and uplifted as whole individuals. And where we have a long ways to go, there's also the fact of, you know, we're seeing names here, biased names on family trees, and also how we work together to really complete this history and putting it together, making sure that we are not separating people in our efforts to find out what had happened here, in our efforts to decide on harm and how that should be repaired. So I think all of this collectively, when you see that we're putting all of the dots together to actually see what happened, what is atonement, what is repair, and what do reparations look like? wanna add to that? You wanna add to that?
I think there's two things I think that the college specifically, when we think about questions about reparations, two areas that I think it'll have to consider. The first being that there's already an identifiable descendant community of Israel Trask. Nika Smith has done a lot of genealogical research. She is a descendant of the enslaved people that Israel Trask enslaved. So the question is going to be, what is that? What is the college? What's the relationship with the college with that descendant population specifically? And there's models that other institutions that have begun to build those kinds of relationships that we could talk about. The other point that I think is a much larger question that I'm not sure how to quantify, because it speaks to the intellectual context that I gestured towards in my remarks. And it's not just the American Colonization Society. It's the question of the presence of pro-slavery thought on campus. It's the question of scientific racism and eugenics in the late 19th century. It's questions of the ideas put forth for redlining, et cetera. What is that? So if the college contributed intellectually to those things that were then weaponized against black people, what does the college do to remedy that? I don't have an answer to that, but this is this intellectual question that I think is so significant that I've been seeing in the research that, so then it raises the question for me then, well, what could the college do with black communities in Western Mass, in Amherst, in the valley itself? What could the college do? Because black people in Western Massachusetts have lived under those ideas, have those ideas, have had those ideas weaponized against them, and the college has helped to perpetuate that in its long history. So that is something, if that makes sense to people, so that's, I don't know how you go about addressing that intellectual legacy, but that's something I think that will have to be thought about and talked about, with not just people on campus, but with actual communities themselves too beyond the campus. But that's what I'll say to that.
Yeah, I'll throw in, this project has begun by focusing on the founding of the college, right? Where'd the money come from? How did we continue? Who built the buildings? What are those names? But one of the things that's really important to understand is that even after the Civil War, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, that the college continued to contribute to scientific racism. The college continued to contribute to, there is a health and hygiene test in the archives from 1933, and it asks questions about what are the symptoms of rubella and what is the best treatment for this and that. And the final question on this health exam that was given at Amherst College in 1933 is, if eugenics is designed to improve the race, what are the characteristics of a good eugenics program? The college has been involved in the creation of the carceral state. The college has been involved in the dissemination of ideas that support that. And so, as we've talked about the narrative of the college having precarious financial situations and finding money among textile mills and the slave trade, after the Civil War, the textile mills of Massachusetts mostly leave and they go south where the labor was cheaper. They eventually go overseas where the labor was even cheaper. And the college turns to, okay, where do we get money in the Gilded Age? We get money from the Pratts. We get money from Henry Clay Folger, and their money comes from oil. So we move from the exploitation of slave labor in the South growing cotton to the continued dispossession of indigenous lands, the extraction of fossil fuels, and the railroads that were built through those indigenous lands to aid and support that extraction, and that's what built Pratt Pool. So there's a lot more to go on. And I didn't even mention John J. McCloy, class of 1916, chief architect of Japanese American internment, and don't get me started on Melville Dewey. The Dewey Decimal System was invented in Morgan Library, which is across the street. So sorry, Cyrus, I know that's not a satisfying answer, but there's a lot to deal with.
I guess something else I was thinking about is, Amherst's current racial history too. I don't think anyone was saying to separate these things. History is, always active, always happening. You can think of Gerald Penny, who's in the class of 1970 something, where at Amherst College they had a swimming test and the lifeguard wasn't looking, and Gerald Penny, who didn't know how to swim, and there's so much pressure from the whole school to have this test, to not be the one person that doesn't know how to swim, he drowns. And when I was working for that reunion class, the class was telling me how it was his fault that he drowned. Or we can look at, too, in the 1960s, the Black Moratorium, where they made the same claims, like the same demands as in the 2015 Amherst Uprising, or in 2020, Reclaim Amherst, something that I worked on. But I think the question is asking, history is active, but to do this racial history work requires a reparative framework. We can't have redress be informed solely from history. And so if we look at what Anika Lopes was talking about, how there's reparations mean so much more than, I guess, fixing every problem. Reparations can't fix every problem. But if we look at Amherst College, we are in the second place in the country that has municipal reparations that was passed through the city. And there's Michelle Miller right there, who's the head of the African Heritage Reparations Assembly. We also, like Mike Jurek said, we have we know that there is a population of people that were affected by Amherst College's slavery. Georgetown had also an affected population, and they have a $400,000 a year program to help those people. So I guess what I ask, again, is how are we making reparations active in our history work, in our research?
I don't think we have another answer for that right now. Mattia.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Anika and Erica, for entering this space. To Cyrus's point, a question that was sort of stirring around for me, I'll speak loudly with no mic, a question that's stirring around for me at this intersection of the history work that you guys are doing and the anti-racism plan is whether there are efforts made to study redress. So there's the studying of history essential, and there are many movements out there, from HR 40 at the federal level, which is a bill to study the remedies for the institution of slavery and its subsequent institutions, oppressive institutions up to today. So would it be possible, or within the realm of either these history projects or the college's anti-racism plan, to study here the nature of redress and what is possible?
Not with our current staffing levels. It's me, Mike.
I want to thank you, Erica. My name is Felicia. I got to meet you today during a meeting, which is just awesome, full circle, small world. Anika, Mike, and Mike, thank you so much. My question, in the line of reparations and what that looks like in very many ways, thinking about this work and the level of heaviness that you, as a person coming and studying as a person of color, or BIPOC community, and women, and all those things in terms of marginalized groups, what is the emotional support that you're receiving and your self-care that you're doing as you're doing all this work? And I see you, doc student over here, amazing work. I'm really excited for you, and wanting to know how people are recognizing the emotional labor that goes in, and thinking about the post-traumatic slave syndrome and the ways in which you internalize those messages as you undo the research, which is extremely important. I heard earlier, that's the lane where we're working with research, but what about the emotional labor and reparations in terms of how people are holding space for you in uncovering all of these important experiences and findings?
Go ahead. Go first.
So I'm laughing, Felicia, because I was at Wisteriahurst today, and we were talking about that. So after we got off from the meeting with you all, I was speaking to the archivist about that, because one of the things that I've realized in doing this work, and even in being a student in Black Studies, is that, I have to, it's not my lived experience, right? But I have to live and relive the trauma of people that I love. And even if they're not directly related to me, I have to relive that experience every time I read a new book, or write a new report for work, or do research for the many projects that I'm working on. And so your question about what does that emotional support look like, I think that in the institutions it doesn't exist. And that is extremely problematic, but I think beyond that is that I think white folks don't understand how it is continuously traumatizing and re-traumatizing, right? That I think that I will say that I won't say that they don't have feelings about it. I won't say that they aren't emotionally impacted by it, right? Especially when they find out that their descendant is, was a slave owner or, enslaved people, right? And benefited from that, and their families continue to benefit from it. But what I've realized too is that in my work, that white people are, they acknowledge that pain in a way that, this year for me has been very hard because I worked on the history for Historic New England. I worked on the history of enslavement across New England. And there was information that I didn't know because most of my research has focused on Massachusetts. And in Connecticut and Rhode Island, which I didn't know, they had a, what did they call it? Gradual emancipation, right? And so we say, this, slavery ended, this period of enslavement doesn't exist in New England anymore. And it's like there are people who never had hope of being free, even as they watch other folks around them have that opportunity, right? And I'm explaining this to people who I work with, and the majority of the folks that I work with are white, and I'm trying to hold back tears, right? And so not to get, super personal, but it's like I'm trying to hold back tears as I'm talking about this because I can then, in tracing the genealogy of people, is that I know that their families are still being impacted and affected to this day, right? As Anika has expressed, right? And so while it's not, directly connected to me, in that the families that I'm researching aren't necessarily directly connected to me, although I've found a lot of connections in the work that I've done, is that I don't think that there is a system that's set up institutionally to say, hey, you're doing this work, right? In Black Studies, in the Black Studies department, John Bracey, rest his soul, was that for me, right? And so, I lost my grandmother last year, and she was that for me, you know what I mean? And so it's like we're losing that system and structure even at the university, where it's like we're not able, we're all trying to, make sure that we are okay on a day-to-day, that we don't have a minute of pause. And I think that is a thing that I will say, and I will encourage all of you who are here, when you're working, especially the white folks in the room, is that when you're working with these populations in these groups of people, is to, one, make sure if you can that you are paying people for their stories, right? Because as I said before, they are sacred. And also that you are giving moments of pause for people who you're working with. Because as we know, there are all of these instances of violence that are happening, and each time something is on the news or is reported, is on social media, we are impacted and we are re-traumatized, right? And so I would encourage, institutions like Amherst College, I think at UMass we always have these safe spaces that we create for people to come and mourn or for people to come and be together, but it can't just be in a moment of trauma, right? It has to be an ongoing thing where we're able to be happy together, we're able to be sad together, we're able to have those moments of pause as they arise and as we need them. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
I would, thank you, thank you. I would add to that and relate and co-sign, but the work, it can be exhausting. And sometimes it can be difficult to separate a come and talk and share it without feeling it. When I talk about my family members, when I talk about the streets like Hazel Avenue, these aren't memories or stories that were passed down to me. I actually walked with them every day. You know, I can hear and smell these people when I think about them. My Aunt Edie, who is about to turn 96, was with us at the opening, and, you know, she remembers what it was like to, you know, talk to her grandfather, who was born enslaved, and how it was very difficult for him to talk. You know, and holding stories of, you know, harm and abuse and what that meant. But I find strength from, I'm very fortunate to have a community around me that does uplift and gives me space to leave town when necessary, to get a break. And also to really, I'm fortunate enough to have videos of like my great-grandfather, who is talking about how the responsibility in bringing these stories forward, in telling them. And, you know, sometimes there can be that frustration. I mean, we've moved to a very interesting shift with 2020, and, you know, we have a lot of people who, and I would say especially youth, who have, you know, redefining themselves of how do they want to move forward. And then you have a lot of others that are, you know, just becoming aware of some things. And, you know, and in some times like this wokeness, I describe can be as woke as my deceased cat. And other times it is really helpful, and, you know, we work together. And I think that, you know, holding each other up, those doing the work that are experiencing these histories through research, and those who have lived it, those who I can identify, because we also have to recognize it's very rare. You know, the history that we can see in Amherst and have access to is very rare, and we are fortunate. In many places, this history has been erased, buildings do not exist, documents were burned, so we don't always have access to this. And, you know, we have shared history here that everyone can relate to and celebrate regardless of where you're from. And I always think in terms of inspiration, like we had folks here that decided, wait a minute, we will be free. We're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to tolerate this for our future generations. And they got up and sacrificed, made the ultimate sacrifices in some cases. So some of us, we could be here and talk with you. And I think that is something, if we think about people were in situations where they had no freedom and they decided, they made these leaps and bounds, look what they did. And we've kind of had this lull, and I find it very exciting, especially with this new generation that we have, like, to think about if they could do that, you know, what can we do? What will future generations do? So you know, as difficult as it can be, I find inspiration through the history, through my ancestors, and really they represent all of us as Black people. They represent all of our ancestors. So.
I think probably time for one more.
Hello, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and for this labor, especially Nika and Erica. Nika, I've seen the Ancestral Bridges exhibit in Frost Library like probably a couple months ago, and it's just really amazing to be able to put a face to that name. So thank you so much for your work in that regard. I was wondering what people felt like in terms of something I find a bit jarring about hearing about the people at Amherst who benefited from slavery and were slave owners is that a lot of our buildings are named after those people who benefited from slavery. Williston is an example that immediately comes to mind. Like, I live so near to Williston, so it's somewhat jarring, and I'm wondering if renaming these buildings, replacing the names that have stood there with names of people who have not contributed to the harm that exists in Amherst is a meaningful step, or do you think that this would be less meaningful and more performative? So yeah, I'd be really curious about people's thoughts on this. And just again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So I can't speak to Amherst College, but I can speak to some of the work that's being done at some of the institutions that I work with. And one of the things some of it has involved like changing the names of buildings, and in other institutions or in other examples where like changing the name of a museum isn't necessarily possible. It's calling out and naming, either through a plaque or some kind of, signage that says like, this is who this person was, here's who this person is to the university and to the communities that have been impacted by this person's existence, right? And so, like I said, I don't think that it can always look like, changing a name. And also, like, I'm thinking about your grandfather. Like, all they can say is no, right? So I think that we have to look to each other, too, as, I'm not an Amherst student, but, for the students here, is to, to your point, Cyrus, of, like, what do reparations look like, right? And so if this is a thing that you all want, then come up with a plan of, like, we're going to rename this building X. Like, New Africa House at UMass, I can't even tell you what it's.
Mills House.
Yes, so Mills House, right? And it's New Africa House, right? If you ask anybody what that place is, and that's because students took over that building and they made a stand and they made demands to the university. And so I would say when we think about concerted effort, right, is that to put it to you also as members of this community to say, like, here's what we want to see happen, here's how it has happened in other places, and here's what that reparation or that redress looks like for us, just as a thought.
Yeah, I'll throw out an additional little point on the renaming of things. When the college abolished fraternities back in 1984, I'm blanking on the name of the frat, but they renamed it Drew House in honor of Charles Drew. And Ed Kennedy, who was one of the research assistants, that kind of really got under his skin because it was Thomas Gibbs who was the first black student to pledge a fraternity and to be admitted to that fraternity. And yet it was named after one of the most famous black graduates of the college who could not have been a member of that fraternity. And so when you're renaming things, and this is what we mean, I mean, it can be frustrating to go slow, but you have to go slow. And the other point that I would just caution folks on is the ancestors and the stories of the black folks of this town belong to the descendants and the black folks of this town. That is not something that the college can simply dip into and say, hey, Anika, oh great, we're gonna just rename that after, and that'll be great, right? You'll be fine with that. We've gotta have a relationship. There's gotta be relationality. And that, I know it's frustrating. I know people want things to change right away. But we gotta take so much into account, and we gotta build the relationships if we want this to be meaningful and to get it right this time. I don't know, anybody?
So I'm gonna speak again. But one of the thoughts that is it's a thing that we actually, in our meeting before today, we had a conversation about is like the retention at the university, right, or at the college. And realizing that you all are here for 4 years, right? And so thinking about how you create a plan or start that process of, relationship building and historical research, and how you leave that behind for the next students who are coming behind you, you know what I mean? So that they're not reinventing the wheel, every time, that last class leaves, that, there is some kind of even relationship building among students so that, like, here's what we did, like a map, right? Like, here's what we did, here's where we stopped, here's where we want to continue to go. So that as new students come, they're able to just pick up without stutter stepping, right? So that's just a thought also.
And I just wanted to add, I was having a brief touch on this, a conversation with Cheryl Hulley, who I think many of you are aware of, and she has invited me. I'm participating in a project, Reimagine New England Histories, with her, and then as well through that with another project, which is with the Porter Phelps House, and one of the things that we talk about when you rename, though I think it is really centered. This is your college, is that you know, there's also the idea of acknowledging, like changing that, and moving on and acknowledging, maybe there's another name, but also being cautious that do you erase that? Erase that history at that same time? Is it possible to have both? And acknowledgement of that intention why? So I think that whether that is a performative call and renaming is really the what is behind it, you know, that intention behind it. Because when we think about future generations, like we're here, and so if you're part of, well, we're renaming this because of this, and ensuring that that reason why is retained.
I'd like to invite our panelists to say any final words. Mike, you had something?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would just mention just one thing, coming at this from someone who studies the history of universities, not only from the period of enslavement, but up and through the present. Universities and colleges have a enormous capacity for absorbing and I don't know what the right word here I want to say. Yeah, neutralizing social movements, radical ideas to fit the mold of what institutions are. Colleges and universities don't like to change. And I think we have to, as we think about and being questions about changing names, et cetera, which is important, I think there's symbolism to that. But if a college simply absorbs those things into itself and fundamentally remains this institution that perpetuates hierarchies in society, and the intellectual apparatus that sustains that, without engaging that, we're going to keep having these same conversations over and over again. So there needs to be, we need to look to that, I would argue. But that's just my 2 cents.
I will just leave with another thank you. It's been great to have this conversation, and I hope that it continues. I would encourage you all to visit ancestral-bridges.org, learn more about the work that we are doing, and to, again, engage with us through the exhibit that's at the Frost Library. It is set up for you to share, to ask questions, to give your opinions, or make suggestions. So, thank you.
Thank you.